Hello everyone. Thank you all for watching the video and leaving meaningful comments. Wishing everyone good health and happiness. In the early morning, the freezing cold pierced through every crack of my small house, waking me up with white puffs of breath escaping my mouth. I lay in bed, listening to the wind whistling outside, then slowly sat up, my hands trembling from the biting chill of winter. Outside, a thick fog blanketed everything, covering the garden in white, making it look like a scene from a watercolor painting. I reached for the pair of gloves that James had bought me yesterday, slipping them on, feeling the soft fabric wrap around my numb fingers. Then I grabbed the pair of socks from the corner of the wardrobe, pulling them up one by one, the warmth spreading slowly, easing the cold in the soles of my feet. The light green scarf he'd given me was right by the bed. I wrapped it around my neck, its faint scent bringing back the warmth of James's presence. I stood in front of the small mirror, looking at myself with the gloves and scarf, and couldn't help but smile at his thoughtfulness. Over at James's wood workshop, the morning was bustling too. The manager got a call from him, his deep voice coming through the phone. He instructed her to personally check on the new shipment of wood, overseeing every detail to ensure its quality, because James was always meticulous about his work. The manager quickly threw on a coat, pulled a wool hat over her head, and stepped out of the small office, her breath turning to white vapor in the chilly dawn. I heard from her later that James put his heart into every piece of wood, as if they weren't just materials but a source of pride for him. Meanwhile, in my little house, I started the day by building a fire, stepping outside with my old flip-flops slapping against the ground. I gathered some dry firewood from under the eaves, stacked it in the stove, struck a match, and watched the flames crackle to life, thin smoke curling into the air. I set a pot on the stove, poured in rice, added water, and cooked a big batch, not for myself, but to mix with food for the dogs and chickens in the yard. The firewood popped and snapped, the smoke stinging my eyes, but I patiently stood by, stirring lightly so the rice wouldn't burn. The pot bubbled and steamed, the smell of rice wafting up, and I mixed in some leftovers from yesterday, letting it cool for the animals. When that was done, I grabbed a bamboo broom and started sweeping the house, the swishing sound echoing on the dirt floor in the quiet space. Dust flew everywhere, so I wiped down the table and chairs with a rag, tidying up a few odds and ends. Then I went out to the garden, picked up the watering can, and watered the rows of lush greens, the icy water seeping through my fingertips, making me shiver. While I was watering, I heard soft footsteps and looked up to see the workshop manager standing there, a friendly smile on her face despite the cold. She said she'd just come from the workshop and stopped by to visit since it was on her way. I quickly set the can down and invited her inside. I brewed 2 cups of green tea, the steam rising from them, warming our frozen hands as we held them. We sat on the old wooden chairs, starting to chat, and she asked about my life, her voice gentle like she wanted to share my burdens. I looked down at my dirt-stained hands, sighed, and began telling her my story, memories flooding back as clear as day. I said my parents died when I was young, and I'd had to live with my uncle, but he never treated me like family. One day, he sold me off to be a stranger's wife, trading me for 2 buffalo, as if my life was worth no more than a pair of farm animals. I lived with that husband, but there was no happiness, just endless days of heaviness and sorrow. Then I met James, who came into my life like a light in a storm, helping me get a divorce and escape that unwanted marriage. He gave me a place to stay, this little house, and from there I started rebuilding my life, finding small joys day by day. The manager listened, her eyes glistening like tears were about to spill, and she grabbed my hand tightly. She said she felt so sorry for me, that I'd been through too much pain, and now I deserved to be happy. She told me she'd always support my feelings for James, that he was a good man, always ready to lend a helping hand. At the same time, James was far off, meeting a business partner about farm products, sitting in a small room with the faint smell of coffee in the air. He examined every sample they showed him, color, quality, packaging, his sharp eyes calm but focused. The partner laid out their plan, he nodded, they exchanged a few words, and the discussion went smoothly, both sides pleased. He decided to team up with them to make Tet jam, picturing jars of sweet preserves lining shelves for the new year, his heart buzzing with excitement for the work. Back home, after pouring my heart out to the manager, I got up and went to the kitchen to cook lunch, inviting her to stay and eat as a thank you for listening. I rinsed the rice, stoked the fire again, and the smell of fresh cooked rice filled the little house. I stir-fried some garden greens, fried a few eggs, the sizzle of oil and the aroma of scallions warming up the space. The manager helped me set the table, 2 bowls and 2 pairs of chopsticks neatly arranged on the old wooden surface. I scooped out steaming rice into the bowls, invited her to dig in, and we sat down, eating and talking, laughter ringing out amid everyday stories. The rice was hot, the greens crisp, the eggs fragrant, a simple meal full of human connection, melting away the winter chill. She complimented my cooking, and I smiled, saying it was just basic stuff, but inside I felt glad she enjoyed it. When we finished, she stood up, saying she had to get back to the workshop, and I walked her to the gate, watching her pull on her coat. Her figure faded down the foggy village road, and I turned back inside, my heart lighter after a morning full of emotion. After the manager left, I stood quietly for a moment under the eaves of the house, gazing at the foggy village road, feeling the chill still clinging to my feet. It was nearly noon, and a faint sunlight pierced through the mist, softening the cold just a little. I let out a long breath, glanced around my small home, and decided to head up to the Orange Hill to pick some fruit, hoping to shake off the morning stillness. I stepped inside, grabbed an old jacket hanging on the wall, and slipped it on, feeling the thick fabric hug my shoulders. Then I picked up my worn straw hat, tied the strap tight so the wind wouldn't blow it away. I took the old bamboo basket, checked to make sure it was still sturdy, and walked out, closing the creaky gate behind me. The sloping path to the Orange Hill stretched out ahead, and I started walking, my old flip-flops slapping against the dirt with each step. A cold breeze blew past, making the scarf James had given me flutter lightly, and I pulled it closer, finding comfort in its warmth on this winter day. The Orange Hill came into view, the trees laden with fruit, their green leaves dotted with bright golden specks under the sun. I set the basket down, stood there for a moment, listening to the wind rustling through the branches, carrying the faint scent of oranges. I reached up and picked a ripe one, its glossy skin taut and heavy in my hand, then carefully peeled it open. The sweet aroma hit me, and I popped a segment into my mouth, the cool, sugary taste bursting on my tongue with a hint of tang that made me hum in delight. The orange was so delicious it surprised me, and I smiled, immediately thinking of picking more to sell at the market. I started selecting the ripest ones, reaching high and bending low, stacking each fruit neatly in the basket. My hands moved quickly, the leaves rustling every time I brushed a branch, a few dry ones drifting down to the ground. Sweat trickled down my forehead, despite the cold, but the effort of picking oranges made me feel oddly invigorated. I watched the basket fill up, the golden oranges piling high, my heart buzzing with the thought of how much people would enjoy them. When the basket was brimming, I tied a strap around it, hoisted it onto my shoulder, and felt its weight press into my back. I started down the hill, my legs aching, but each step brought a small burst of joy, knowing my hard work would pay off. The village road appeared again, and I followed the familiar path, the wind picking up, tousling my hair, though I paid it no mind. At the market, I set the basket down in my usual spot, wiped the sweat from my brow, and arranged the oranges neatly, their shiny surfaces gleaming in the midday sun. People began bustling by, and I called out to them, my voice cutting through the market's hum. Passers-by glanced over, some stopping to pick up an orange, asking the price, then nodding and buying. I smiled back, sharing a few words about my hill, how the oranges were fresh, homegrown, free of chemicals. The bright, juicy fruit caught everyone's eye, and soon people were walking off with bags of them, my hands clutching warm coins fresh from the market. While I was selling, I heard the familiar rumble of a motorbike, looked up, and saw James pulling over, stepping off with a big grin on his face. He said he'd just come from meeting his partner and spotted me selling oranges, so he stopped to lend a hand, and I nodded shyly, my heart warming at his presence. He stood beside me, his deep voice ringing out as he called to customers, his hands deftly picking oranges for them without a hint of hesitation. People noticed his enthusiasm, his easy smile, and started buying even more, the basket emptying faster than I'd expected. I watched him, a smile creeping onto my face, thinking how everything seemed easier with him around. Before long, The basket was bare, and I counted the money, looking up to say it sold so fast thanks to him, but he just laughed and ruffled my hair playfully. His hands were still smudged with a bit of orange dirt, but his eyes sparkled, as if this small task brought him joy too. When we were done, James grabbed my hand, saying to come with him for a bit, and I followed, curious about what he had in mind. We walked past a few stalls to a small shoe store near the market, the smell of fresh leather wafting from the rows of shoes on display. He glanced at the worn-out flip-flops on my feet, shook his head, and picked out a new pair for me, simple brown ones that fit just right. I stood there, flustered, not expecting him to notice such a small thing. He said to wear them to keep my feet warm in the cold, then stepped to the counter to pay, handing me the pair with a gentle smile. I took them, my heart feeling as warm as if the midday sun had settled inside me, despite the chilly breeze. James started his motorbike, the engine rumbling to life, and told me to hop on so he could take me home. I nodded and climbed up behind him. I held on to his jacket lightly, feeling his warmth seep through the fabric, cutting through the afternoon's cold. The village road stretched out ahead, peaceful with rice fields lining both sides, the wind whipping through my hair, carrying the faint scent of earth. He drove slowly, glancing back now and then to ask if I was cold, his voice soft like a passing breeze. I shook my head, smiling that I was fine, but inside I felt a lightness, like I'd found a steady anchor in this simple life. Our shadows stretched long on the ground, the fading sunlight painting the way home with a quiet beauty. When we reached the gate, he stopped, and I stepped off, still holding the new shoes, looking at him with a wordless gratitude in my eyes.